This video is for educational and infotainment purposes only. It is not intended to encourage or glorify the use of illegal drugs, violence, or criminal activity in any way. Rafael Caro Quintero, nicknamed Rafa, co-founder of the Guadalajara cartel in Mexico, has finally been arrested, or rearrested, after simply being allowed to walk out of a Mexican prison almost a decade ago. And this is a huge deal for both the DEA and the FBI. For the FBI, Rafa was on their top 10 most wanted list with a $20 million reward for information leading to his arrest. That was the most of anybody on the list. And for the DEA, well, the man who was found guilty in a Mexican court of killing one of their own, Agent Kiki Camarena, is finally back behind bars. So how was he captured? You're about to find out. I'm Joshua Roberts, attorney at law, and you are watching Lawyer Up. In today's episode, we're going to take a look at the capture of Rafael Caro Quintero, known as Rafa, one of the co-founders of the Guadalajara cartel, who in the 70s and the 80s controlled most of the drug trafficking in Mexico along the United States corridor. Now, I already have a full-length feature video on his life on this channel, including his childhood and how he got into and learned the drug trade. It goes into great detail about the history of the Guadalajara cartel, its members, its rise and its fall, and its involvement in the death of U.S. DEA agent Kiki Camarena. So while in this video we are going to hit the highlights so that everybody has a basic understanding of why Rafa's arrest is such a big deal, we are not going to get into the minutia and look at every fact and every story in this particular video. If you are interested in getting into those details, simply search this channel and you'll find videos on Rafa, Kiki Camarena, Felix Gallardo, Don Neto, El Chapo, El Mayo, Pablo Escobar, you name it, they're on this channel. So this video is basically a supplement to my other videos detailing the information surrounding Rafa's recent capture. If you enjoy the video, hit that like button for me. If you got something to say, you got a comment, put it in the comment sections below. If you haven't subscribed, what are you waiting for? Smash that subscribe button for me. And you guys know what? I love it when you share me on social media. So the story begins when Rafa Caro Quintero was born on October 3rd, 1952 in the Mexican state of Sinaloa. Specifically, he was born near a city called Badiraguato. It's a little town of about 3,500, but it is the hometown of a bunch of famous drug lords. The general area is responsible for Rafa, his brother Miguel Caro Quintero, Don Neto, El Chapo, El Azul, the Beltran Leyva brothers, and Pedro Aviles Perez. That is a bunch of very big cartel names coming from a very little town. So Rafa got into growing and trafficking marijuana with those guys, who were initially led by Pedro Aviles Perez, aka Don Pedro. The center of their operations was among the Sierra Madre mountain range, within the Triángulo Dorado, or the Golden Triangle region of Chihuahua, Sinaloa, and Durango. It was from this remote location that Don Pedro was able to establish a drug trafficking organization that sowed, cultivated, and distributed massive amounts of contraband. The group primarily trafficked marijuana and heroin, but was also one of the first to start trafficking cocaine into the United States from South America. As the organization grew, Don Pedro acquired several men under his command, and it's a veritable who's who of future drug lords. In his inner circle was Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, who would later be the leader of the Guadalajara cartel, and who used his time with the federal judicial police to shield and protect the drug trade. Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, Don Neto, the right-hand man of Felix Gallardo, He would also be a future leader of the Guadalajara cartel, and he was basically the money guy. Rafael Caro Quintero, Rafa, who would be the third founder of the Guadalajara cartel. He was the guy principally responsible for growing and cultivating the weed that they trafficked, and he, of course, is the subject of this video. As the group's success grew, several other traffickers or drug plazas began to spring up throughout Mexico. And then things started going sideways within Don Pedro's organization in 1978. Info from both the U.S. and Mexican authorities would later reveal that there was a power struggle that had developed between Don Pedro and Felix Gallardo that would ultimately lead to each man plotting a way to seize control for himself. And we know that just prior to Don Pedro's death, there was a meeting of the leaders of the various plazas that had sprung up in Mexico. Gallardo wanted to establish one large group of all of the major drug traffickers. Aviles didn't really see the need and took particular offense when one of his plaza rivals credited Gallardo for bringing all the parties together. Regardless, shortly after the meeting, Don Pedro is killed, and to this day there is much mystery that surrounds how his death went down. It's beyond the scope of this video, but if you are interested in examining all the different theories of how he was killed, check out my video on this channel about his life. So with the death of Don Pedro, Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo Daneto, and Rafael Caro Quintero Rafa would then take over the organization's leadership. And pursuant to the earlier meeting, they coordinated the various plazas, their production and operations, and formed the core of what became known as the Guadalajara cartel. And these guys took slinging dope to the next level. First, they started producing high-quality seedless marijuana, summa, in mass quantities in large multi-acre fields. And really, nobody in the history of the world had produced marijuana on this scale before. It was also during this time, the early 80s, that the Colombian drug cartels were shoveling massive amounts of cocaine into the U.S. Now, DEA efforts were focused primarily on Florida, which was a major shipping destination for Colombian cartels. So to avoid the law enforcement scrutiny in Florida, the Colombian cartels began to utilize Mexico as a transshipment point. And by the mid-80s, they were also working with someone you may have heard of, Pablo Escobar and the Medellin cartel, in assisting with trafficking boatloads of cocaine across the United States border. So drug trafficking in the 80s was dominated by the Guadalajara cartel, who saw legendary traffickers like El Chapo and El Mayo moving up in the organization. And life was really good with the Guadalajara cartel. Rafa and company were kings, and they had acquired hundreds of houses and ranches and were estimated to be worth over $1 billion. And by unifying all the plazas, the Guadalajara cartel was able to protect the trade primarily with money and bribes rather than bullets, as much of what they were doing was being protected by local law enforcement, politicians, the Mexican DFS, and the United States CIA, who was using the Mexican drug trade to secretly fund Ronald Reagan's war against communism in Nicaragua. This was a big deal because after the Iran-Contra scandal blew up, it became the only way that the Contras were receiving financial support. However, not everybody in law enforcement was on board. The US DEA and the Mexican military were still seeking to bust drug traffickers. So in November of 1984, acting on information provided in part by US DEA agent Kiki Camarena, 450 Mexican soldiers, backed by helicopters, conducted Operation Godfather and destroyed a 2,500-acre marijuana plantation known as Rancho Buffalo in Chihuahua that had an estimated annual production of $1 billion. This was an unbelievable blow to the Guadalajara cartel and to the U.S.'s ability through the CIA to fund ongoing operations of the Contras in Nicaragua. And this was the second field that was busted with information from Kiki, so he had become quite the problem. In fact, the DEA says by January of 1985, Kiki was extremely close to unlocking a multi-billion-dollar drug pipeline involving the CIA, Mexican government officials, politicians, local police, and the Guadalajara cartel. So needless to say, Rafa and the Guadalajara cartel were making preparations to deal with these meddlers. And on February 7th of 1985, U.S. DEA agent Kiki Camarena was abducted in broad daylight. Kiki was surrounded by 5 armed men, Jalisco police officers on the cartel's payroll, who threw him in a car. Camarena was taken to a cartel mansion at 881 Lope de Vega Drive in western Guadalajara. It's disputed, but many say this property was owned by Rafa at the time. There, Kiki was beaten, tortured, and interrogated over a 30-hour period. Ultimately, Camarena's body was found almost a month later, wrapped in plastic and ditched next to a ranch in Michoacan. It is a fascinating story with complicity of the United States CIA. But the specifics are beyond the scope of this video, so if you are interested, the entire story of Kiki Camarena is also available on this channel. Camarena's torture and murder prompted a swift reaction from the U.S. DEA, which launched Operation Leyenda, or Legend, the largest DEA homicide investigation ever undertaken, with the 3 lead suspects being the leaders of the Guadalajara cartel. Feeling the heat, Caro Quintero would leave Mexico with his associates and his girlfriend Sarah Casio. But Rafa's freedom would last less than 30 days after a homesick Sarah had a call home traced by the authorities. So on April 4th of 1985, Caro Quintero was arrested while sleeping in Costa Rica and extradited back to Mexico on charges of involvement in Camarena's murder. He would be charged in both the United States and Mexico, but was tried only in Mexico and sentenced to 40 years for the murder of Kiki Camarena, amongst other crimes. Don Neto and Felix Gallardo would also be caught, tried, and convicted. And then what had been a unified Guadalajara cartel fragmented into several different drug plazas or territories that were headed by various lead families of the Guadalajara cartel. So by 1989, we have a whole new way of doing business in narco world with the dismantling of the Guadalajara cartel. It was the end of the era where money and bribes were used to protect the drug trade, and it was the beginning of when things started to bend towards the violence that we see in the Mexican drug trade today. Meanwhile, Rafa would be incarcerated at the Federal Social Readaptation Center No. 1, Altiplano in Juarez, which was billed as Mexico's Alcatraz, or its Supermax prison. It has and currently holds dozens of drug cartel leaders, and it was touted as impenetrable and inescapable. That was until June 11th of 2015, when El Chapo escaped through an almost mile-long tunnel that was dug under the prison and up 33 feet, tapping through the floor of the shower in his cell. That event is also beyond the scope of this video, but it's one of my favorite narco stories of all time, and I tell you all about it in my video on El Chapo, so check that out if you are interested. Anyway, from Altiplano, Rafa would bounce between prisons over the next 28 years, when, man, luck was on his side. In the early hours of August 9th of 2013, a Jalisco court ruled that Caro Quintero was improperly tried in a federal courtroom for crimes that should have been tried at the state level. Specifically, when Caro Quintero was given his 40-year federal sentence, he was sentenced for murder, which was a state crime, and not for drug trafficking, which was the federal crime. So the appellate judge threw out the murder conviction, ruled that Rafa had already served all of his time on the federal crimes he was convicted of, and ordered his immediate release. After he was released, the United States lost its mind. They said, you just let a guy who was convicted of murdering a DEA agent go? There was also murder charges pending in the U.S., and we have an extradition agreement between our countries, so what's up? And while the extradition of a Mexican national to the United States is admittedly complicated, Barack Obama immediately petitioned the Mexican government to act. And they did. Within 5 days, a federal arrest warrant was issued for the rearrest of Rafa on additional charges in Mexico. But it was too late. He was gone. And there was little to no sign of him publicly for almost a decade. Now, there was a July of 2016 interview with Proceso magazine wherein Rafa claimed he did not kill Kiki Camarena. He also told the reporter that he was no longer a drug trafficker and that peace was the only thing he desired. But that statement, as it turns out, was entirely false. In reality, Rafa was very much still in the game and became involved with a brand new drug cartel in Caborca, Sonora, which is located just south of the state of Arizona. This was evidenced by a significant uptick in violence between the criminal cells of the Caborca cartel, led by Rafa's nephew, Rodrigo Paez Quintero, and the Sinaloa cartel, now operated by El Chapo's son. And for almost a decade, they were unable to find him. Until now. In a joint operation with the Mexican Navy and Attorney General's office, they tracked Rafa to a site in the mountains near Sinaloa's border with the northern state of Chihuahua. And on July 15th of 2022, nearly a decade after he walked out of a Mexican prison, Max, a law enforcement search dog, sniffed him out of the bushes where he was hiding in San Simon, Sinaloa, and he was taken into custody. According to Mexico's National Arrest Registry, there are 2 pending arrest warrants for him, as well as, of course, the extradition request from the United States. Now, this apprehension did not go without incident, as a Mexican Navy Black Hawk helicopter carrying 15 people crashed during the operation, killing all but 1 on board. In the end, the arrest was a bit of a surprise, as Mexico's President Andrés Manuel López Obrador had previously maintained he was not particularly interested in capturing drug lords and preferred to avoid the violence associated with those types of arrests because, quite frankly, law enforcement was outmanned and outgunned by the cartels. But nonetheless, they obviously saw an opportunity and they took it. So as of today, the Mexican Supreme Court had reinstated Rafa's conviction, so he still has 12 years of his murder sentence in Mexico left to serve. The next step will be to see if the Mexican government is interested in agreeing to the United States extradition request so that the U.S. can also try him for the murder of DEA agent Kiki Camarena. Regardless, the arrest of Caro Quintero did accomplish a couple of things. It marks off one of the 15 most wanted international fugitives by Interpol, and of course, marks off one of the top 10 of the FBI's most wanted criminals. As for the reaction of the U.S. after the arrest, U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland said, quote, "There is no hiding place for anyone who kidnaps, tortures, and murders American law enforcement. We are deeply grateful to the Mexican authorities for their capture and arrest of Rafael Caro Quintero." Also, White House senior Latin American advisor Juan Gonzalez wrote in a Twitter post, quote, "This is huge," end quote. But will this arrest make a difference in the violence surrounding the drug trade in Mexico? Probably not. Ultimately, in the 30 years that followed the collapse of the Guadalajara cartel, the fledgling cartels that first existed would fight and fracture into the 9 cartels that currently dominate the Mexican drug trade, with these groups choosing to rely on violence to claim their territories and trafficking routes instead of the bribery that had marked their predecessors. It is these continuing disputes and escalating conflicts that has created the political, social, and military chaos that we now know as the Mexican drug war. Will Rafa stand trial in the United States for the murder of Kiki Camarena? Well, who knows? But what you can be assured of is that if he does, it will be covered by yours truly, Lawyer Up. So stay tuned. That is the episode. If you're interested in more information about anybody that I spoke about in today's video, we have a feature-length video on him. Also note that Rafa, of course, is a major character in the Netflix series Narcos Mexico, so for a fictionalized retelling of the story, you can check that out on Netflix. That is all for today. Thank you for watching. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and share. I'm Joshua Roberts, attorney at law, and you've been watching Lawyer Up.